Coming of age movies. Movies where a child goes through some sort of maturity or transition. This could be physical, mental, or emotional. Films such as Mean Girls, 13, Perks of Being a Wallflower, and our topic of today, Girl in Progress, all serve as coming of age movies. In the case of Girl in Progress, Ansia Dad has a step by step plan as to how she can become more adult. From her perspective, she has to go through the coming of age story. Her plans are as follows. She wants to go through this phase in which she is the quote unquote good girl. She dresses up in like a nerd, or at least the way nerds were depicted in the early 2010s. Um, she joins the chess club. She gets a good reputation by her English teacher, so on and so forth. However, at some point, that all changes and she starts acting like the total opposite end. She then starts to dress up like the quote unquote bad girls. She attracts one of the bad boys named Trevor, and she changes the way she dresses up. She even drinks and she does the thing that I can't really mention on YouTube, but she wants to do the, what can I say, the horizontal mambo for the first time at a party. Yes, that is the thing that is gonna get her to be more mature. The irony in all of this is that the more she goes into this plan, Antia Dad ends up being more immature, which is the opposite of what she wants to achieve. The movie came out when I was about 12 years old. I remember going to the nearest DVD rental store and renting it more often than not. As you can tell, I really enjoyed the movie back then. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I definitely thought I was being edgy by renting the film. As an adult, though, my opinions of the movie has definitely changed, and we are going to go into more details about that. But before we do so, I would just like to introduce or reintroduce myself. Hi, I'm Sassycritic. I talk about films, television shows, and novels, so if that is your thing, hop on for the ride. And what an interesting ride it is, because today we are going to be talking about Girl in Progress from 2012. What do you think about this movie? Let me know down in the comments. I would also just like to say thank you so much for 148 subscribers. My next goal is to get to 500 subscribers, so if you have not subscribed yet, definitely do so. I'm trying a new method of reviewing films where I basically will do a short review, so that would be about 30 seconds to about a minute, and upload that to YouTube Shorts. There won't be any spoilers, but it will basically have a summarized version of how I feel about the film and a rating out of 10. Along with that, I will serve a longer video, which is the one that you are currently watching, and basically go into more depth about the film and possibly look at the themes and how I feel about the film overall. So if you are someone who likes short movie reviews, or if you are someone who likes longer film discussions, definitely subscribe, as this is the channel for you. Also, turn on the notification bell, because then you will not miss a video. But I think we've taken a lot of time in the intro. Let's talk about Girl in Progress. What is Girl in Progress about? Girl in Progress follows a young adolescent girl by the name of Ansia Dad, who all of a sudden, after English class, decides that she wants to go through her own coming of age story. She comes from a single parent household, being raised by her mother, Grace. Grace does not seem to have a lot of time for Ansiedad, as she has a boyfriend who is also married and works two jobs, one of whom is for her boyfriend, and the other is a waitress at a fish diner. So Ansiedad goes through this plan to quote unquote become more adult. And from her perspective, becoming more adult means that in the beginning, she will act like a total good girl. She will join the chess club, get good grades, impress her teachers, and even her mother. She will even go to an old age home, meet a random elderly woman, and befriend them. But just as things seem to be going well, Ansiedad will then do a 180 and she will dress up totally different. She will attract the popular bad girls, try and get herself a bad boy, in this case, Trevor, and even give away her virginity, or at least try to. So, why does Ansiedad do all this? So, I believe that there are two reasons as to why Ansiedad puts herself in this whole coming of age story. The first is something that she actually confesses in the film. She wants to be more adult like and more mature. The second is something that she actually never admits in the film, but there's plenty of evidence that that is also a reason. And that is to get her mother's attention. Let me explain. In Girl in Progress, we see that Ansiedad is raised by her single mother, Grace. Grace is working two jobs, the one being at a fish sort of diner, and the other working for a rich doctor as a maid. And that rich doctor becomes an important element because Grace is actually dating that doctor who is also married. It's also implied in the movie that the reason why they ended up in Seattle was because Grace had a terrible relationship before and therefore they moved to Seattle. And it's also implied that every time Grace goes through a bad breakup, her and Ansiedad have to move from place to place to place. And clearly, this does not give stability to Ansiedad because that would literally mean that Ansiedad's stability is depending on her mother and the stability of her mother's relationship with other boyfriends. There are little moments throughout this film that prove that Ansiedad is doing this just to get her mother's attention. In the beginning of the film, we, of course, see that she's in a relationship with the doctor who is also married. The first time that we see them as a couple is when they are going on a date. Ansiedad is left home alone. She has to clean the house and she is left to make her own supper. One thing that I did note about the dinner that she made for herself was something that I've really been trying to figure out, like so many years later. She makes herself a cup of filtered coffee and then she takes a roll and she dips it in the coffee and she eats that. I don't really get it, but if anyone knows what this dish is called and if it's really tasty, please let me know down in the comments because I think for the longest time I was just so confused on the dish. There's another moment with Ansiedad and her mother. So Ansiedad, or Anne for short, because she does eventually change her name in the film, she goes to a chess tournament and she wins and she gets herself a medal. When she wears that medal at home and she tells her mother says congratulations, but also calls her a nerd. So even though Ansiedad gets that little attention from her mother, the little attention that she does get is degrading to say the least. Imagine you end up being part of the chess club and you go to a chess tournament and you clearly have the intelligence to do so much that you actually win a tournament, or at least you are so good that you at least get a medal, and your mother at the end of the day says, "Oh, such a nerd." It's the most degrading thing I could ever like imagine a child going through with their parents, because you can clearly see Ansiedad wants the attention from her mother. She wants to be loved and adored by her mother, but she doesn't get that at this point of the film. The next time that we really get to see Grace and Ansiedad interact, and this is a very important one, is when Ansiedad runs out of shampoo and calls upon Grace for help. So, for context, in this particular time in the film, Ansiedad has already isolated herself from Tavita. She's in with the popular girls and she is in the progress of trying to get Trevor's attention. So her mom comes along with the little bit of shampoo, rinses it in water, and washes her daughter's hair. This is a very sweet and vulnerable moment as we get to see a little bit of interaction between the mother and daughter. So this is when Ansiedad basically tells her mom, like, you would have been a really great hairstylist. And the two of them have this conversation. It's really sweet, and we can clearly see this is a vulnerable moment. It's also the part in the movie where you can clearly see on Ansiedad's face that she may just change her mind about wanting to be fully in with the popular girls and may want to go back to Tavita. But just when that is completely changed, Grace's phone rings. And who is it? None other than her doctor boyfriend. And that is when Ansiedad decides she's going to continue with her plan. It is through the bathtub scene that we can see that Ansiedad is really desperate to have a good, strong bond with her mother. However, to Ansiedad's disappointment, when Grace answers the phone that happens to be her boyfriend, Ansiedad decides she's going to continue with her plan, go to a party and sleep with Trevor. By the way, Trevor is played by Langdon LeBryan, who you may know as Declan from Degrassi. The first time I saw him in this movie, I literally got the fright of my life. But anyway, she wants to spend the night with Trevor. At the party, she finds out that Trevor is actually not the bad boy that she thinks he is. He's doing it as all a facade for his dad, just so that he can quote unquote piss him off. Ansiedad is disappointed by all of this and tells him, nope, we need to continue sleeping with each other. But Trevor, on the other hand, just wants to get to know Ansiedad and possibly start a relationship with her. At some point, Ansiedad gets nervous and runs out of the room. There, we can see the popular girls who start to ostracize her. Trevor, who we had a little bit of character development in that little scene, ends up saying that they did, in fact, sleep together. Ansiedad runs out and is embarrassed and is completely shutted out by the popular girls. So at this particular point of the movie, Ansiedad is completely alone, as even her best friend Tavita doesn't even want to talk to her because of how Ansiedad treated her. More on Tavita later, as we have an entire section on her. The next moment that we see Grace and Ansiedad is when Ansiedad plans to run away. She goes to Grace's doctor boyfriend and gets him to give her money for bus fare. She buys herself a bus ticket and she plans on leaving town. Luckily, Grace finds her on time and convinces her to stay at home. It's then that Grace tells her about Davita. Again, more on Davita later. So we do get to see another mother-daughter moment, and that is at Davita's house. The two clearly have a stronger bond than what it was in the beginning of the movie. At the end of the movie, we do get to see Grace and Ansiedad have a stronger bond. Ansiedad thinks that they are going to have to move because Grace and the doctor have broken up. However, Grace says, no, you are going to stay. We are not moving anywhere. And so they decide they are going to stay in Seattle and have a better bond. Ansiedad decides that she is not going to try and be more rebellious, but rather just be herself. She continues being part of the chess club and she continues to participate in more tournaments. Let's talk about Davita. Now, this section is going to have a massive trigger warning as we are going to be discussing eating disorders and general fat phobia. If these are topics that make you feel uncomfortable or they trigger you, please feel free to skip this section. With that said, let's dive into it. Admittedly, when I was writing the script, my main motivator was the character Tavita. Now, I did say in the beginning of this video that I grew up watching this movie, and I was about 12, I was about to turn 13, and I was hooked on this film. But the one thing I did not realize was the amount of times that I have internalized the negative comments that were made towards Tavita, played by Rainey Rodriguez. I didn't know how to start this section of this video. If I should rant about my experience as being a plus size girl in a world that favors skinny girls, or if I should go into the general portrayal of how fat girls are seen on television and in film. Instead, I will talk about Tavita as a character, her personality, if she's a stereotype, if she's not a stereotype, and even drop in some personal examples. I also just want to say that I am not a professional, nor am I a doctor when it comes to eating disorders. So I am just going to talk about Tavita and how that is portrayed on screen. Cool? Let's get into it. So Tavita, also known as Jenna, serves as Ansiedad's best friend in the film. We get to see her in the opening scene when Ansiedad is doing her presentation and Tavita is the one doing the projector stuff. For some reason, the teacher calls her Jenna instead of Tavita, which makes me think that the reason why they call her Jenna at school is because people can't pronounce her name. It's similar to Grace. Grace is named Grace because people can't pronounce her Spanish name. So we get to see Tavita being Ansiedad's best friend. And this is where things get interesting because in the beginning of the movie, I really thought that Grace was going to insult Tavita because of her weight. But no, Grace actually insults Tavita based off of her clothing. The first time that we see Tavita being insulted for her weight is in the second half of the film when the popular girl sees her with Ansiedad wanting to sit with the popular girls, but she gets rejected. The popular girl makes a whole lot of comments talking about her size, and she even says, "Do I look like a meal to you?" In an attempt to get more popular, Ansiedad joins in on the banter, making fun of her best friend, making Tavita feel inferior. Literally calling Tavita, and I quote, a fat blob. Just a side note, I didn't know how I was going to talk about this section. I initially wrote out in the script as me talking about general fat phobia in media, and in the next draft, I ended up talking about my experience as being a fat girl in a world that literally loves the skinny ones. But instead, I decided to talk more about Tavita while also talking about my personal experiences. I realized that at this part of the movie that I actually internalized that particular comment. Why? Because when I was 18 years old and I was a university student and I was talking amongst my peers, I told them I was fat and that I was a quote unquote fat blob. I didn't realize that I had actually internalized a lot of the negative ways in which Tavita was spoken about in this movie, but I did. And I don't know if that was a particularly a coincidence or I got it from this movie, but I do recall myself telling my friends that I am a quote unquote fat blob. And that was back like in 2018. So at that point, it was like 5 years after the movie was released. So that was just like an interesting tidbit. But yeah, the world is cruel to people who are slightly bigger than the rest. Anyway, back to Davida. Tavita is ostracized because of her size, and she's also isolated by the popular girls because of that. She is further betrayed by her best friend Ansiedad, and so she is left to just spend time with her boyfriend Ferguson. The next time that we see Davida is when she is officially dating Ferguson, but she looks tired. She looks haggard. Her clothes have completely changed. And now she's sneaking in a pill and drinking it with something that looks like a can of beer. When Ansiedad tries to talk to her about this, of course, Davida does not react well. And who can blame Davida? Davida was betrayed by her best friend. Ferguson is calling Tavita, and you can clearly see Tavita being on edge. She takes the pill, and when asked about the pill, Tavita says that it's quote unquote skinny pills. She then runs after Ferguson, and that is the end of that particular scene. This was really a hard one to watch. To see someone like Davida, who we see in the beginning of the film being what I could only describe as being quirky but really intelligent, being the literal opposite of that, it was just really hard to swallow and to get through. Anyway, after that particular scene, the next time that we do get to see Davida is one where Tavita and her boyfriend Ferguson break up, and Ansiedad sees this fight happening at the school. When Ansiedad tries to at least comfort Tavita, Tavita says, "Nope, this is all your fault," and runs away. So when we see Tavita being upset and angry and being on edge, it does seem like she is in fact starving herself. We don't see her eat after that. And I think besides two scenes earlier on in the film, one scene where she says that she's hungry, and another where we get to see her eat in the lunchroom. The other times that we do see Davida, she's not with food, and it's in those scenes where she is being very angry, on edge. And we do know that if you don't eat or you're not getting enough of nutrients and you're hungry all the time, your moods are going to swing. You are going to be quote unquote moody, or your mind isn't going to function the way it's supposed to. The next time that we hear from Davida, not see, but hear, is when Grace and Ansiedad are reunited, and we get told that it's really bad. It's quote unquote really bad with Davida. So Grace and Ansiedad go to Davita's home, and we don't even get to see Davida in the scene, but we see the doctors come downstairs and talk to her parents. And this is where this is where I disagree with the movie. What I really would have loved to see is Ansiedad go upstairs to talk to Davida, and so that Davida can explain her side of the story. Maybe what could have happened was Davida explains to Ansiedad, which at this part of the movie is called Anne, so I'm just going to call her Anne. Yeah, so Davida could have told Anne that, after you said those things about me, the only thing I felt control over was what I can and cannot eat, and therefore I looked at the skinny pills. I did not like the comments that you made about me. We could have seen an explanation of Tavita's behavior, we could have gotten some insight about her relationship with Ferguson, but the movie totally scraps that. I don't know if there's maybe a deleted scene where maybe Tavita explains to Ansiedad about why she ended up taking the pills and just why her mental health ended up the way she did, but we don't really get to see that. The next time that we do see Davida is when Ansiedad visits her, and she gets Davida this cardboard cutout that says "I'm sorry," and the two end up making up and become best friends again. In my opinion, Davida's story could have been fleshed out more, or at least it could have been a story on its own. I was so invested in Davida's story, I really just wanted to see more of it. What is interesting is that when I was talking about this film and writing the script, I had more to say on Davida than I had on the main character. I love Rainey Rodriguez, and she's a really good actress, especially in this film. But I feel like when it came to her story, and I know that she's more of a side character than a main character, but I would have loved to see more of her story fleshed out. More of that relationship with Ferguson, more of that downward spiral into her taking those pills. I think maybe seeing a bit a bit more scenes from Davita's point of view would have allowed us as the audience to gain more insight into her situation. My overall thoughts. So, how do I feel about this movie? Well, it's okay. It's definitely not the worst coming of age movie that I've seen, but it's also not the best. If you are looking for a more fleshed out story with interesting characters and is a coming of age story, I would definitely recommend The Perks of Being a Wallflower or even Mean Girls. But I do have to say that I can definitely see what the filmmakers were aiming with this movie, and that is something that I cannot fault them on. It's just that sometimes the writing did not do them a favor, and some characters needed to be fleshed out more, while other characters' stories needed to be shown more on screen in order for us to get the full picture. But there are some particular moments that I found to be really sweet. Overall, it is an okay film that I do aim on watching again, and therefore I'm going to rate it a perfectly 6 out of 10. So, here we are. Thank you so much for watching. If you really liked this video and you've made it up to this point, feel free to give this video a thumbs up. If you are someone that is into long film discussions or short film reviews, feel free to subscribe and to leave the notification bell on. What did you think of Girl in Progress? Did you grow up watching this movie, or was it a film that you recently came across? If you haven't seen this movie, did this video encourage you to go ahead and watch it? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. But until then, I will see you in the next one. Bye.